April 18th, 1906, 5:12 in the morning. In about a minute, the richest city on the American West Coast will start to come apart. The ground moves for almost a full minute, then the real horror begins. The fire chief, the one man who planned for this exact day, is killed in the first 60 seconds. The firefighters connect their hoses, and nothing comes out. The water mains are gone. For 3 days, fire eats the city, block by block. The army dynamites whole streets to stop it and spreads it instead. 3,000 people die. 80% of San Francisco burns to the ground. 250,000 people lose everything in a single morning. And then, in just 9 years, this city rebuilds itself into something brighter than before. I used AI to bring 1906 San Francisco back exactly as it stood and as it fell. Stay with me. Before that morning, San Francisco was the jewel of the West. In 1906, it was the 9th largest city in America, the busiest port on the Pacific, home to around 400,000 people. Gold Rush money had built mansions on Nob Hill and grand hotels downtown. The Palace Hotel was one of the most luxurious in the world. Down by the waterfront sat the Barbary Coast, a tangle of saloons, gambling dens, and dance halls that never really slept. It was a city of opera and silk, sitting on top of wooden Victorian houses packed tight together. Almost nobody was thinking about the fault line running underneath it all. On the night of April 17th, the most famous voice in the world was in town. Enrico Caruso, the great Italian tenor, sang the lead in Carmen at the Grand Opera House on Mission Street. The house was packed. The performance was a triumph. Afterward, Caruso went back to his suite at the Palace Hotel, a happy man, planning to sing again in 2 days. Remember Caruso. In a few hours, the chandelier above his bed will start to swing. All across the city, 400,000 people went to sleep that night with no idea what was coming at dawn. At 12 minutes past 5 it came. First, a sharp jolt, a warning. Then, about 10 seconds later, the real shock. The ground heaved for 45 to 60 seconds. Survivors said it sounded like a freight train tearing through the earth. Streets rolled like ocean waves. Brick walls peeled off buildings and crushed everything below. The land that had been swamp and filled-in bay simply liquefied, swallowing whole houses. In his suite, Caruso watched the chandelier try to touch the ceiling. And in a fire station on Bush Street, the city's fire chief, Dennis Sullivan, was sleeping. He had spent years warning the city to prepare for exactly this. A heavy chimney crashed straight through the roof and struck him. The one man who could have led the fight was down in the first minute. Nearly 400 people died before the shaking even stopped. The shaking was only the beginning. Within minutes, fires broke out all over the city. Broken gas lines fed them. One blaze started when a woman lit her stove, not knowing the quake had cracked her chimney. It would burn down whole neighborhoods and earn a grim nickname, the Ham and Eggs Fire. The fire department raced out, what was left of it, and connected their hoses. Nothing came out. The earthquake had shattered the water mains. The great reservoirs that fed the city sat directly on the San Andreas Fault, and their pipes had snapped. A city about to be swallowed by fire suddenly had no water to fight it with. With no water, the city had only one weapon left: blow up buildings to make gaps the fire could not cross. The army took over. General Frederick Funston sent in federal troops. The mayor issued an order to shoot looters on sight, and soldiers who had never handled dynamite started leveling whole blocks. It went wrong almost every time. The blasts threw burning debris into untouched buildings and started new fires instead of stopping old ones. More than 30 separate fires merged into one firestorm that burned for 4 days. Caruso, clutching a signed photo of the president, fought his way out of the city by boat and train and swore he would never come back. He never did. While the rich bankers downtown locked their vaults and ran, one man did the opposite. His name was Amedeo Giannini. 2 years earlier, he had opened the Bank of Italy in a converted saloon, a bank for the working immigrants the big banks would not touch. As the fire closed in, Giannini got to his bank and pulled out around $80,000 in gold and cash. He hid it under crates of oranges in 2 produce wagons and drove it 18 miles through the chaos to his home. The big banks declared they could not reopen for months. Giannini set up a plank across 2 barrels on the wharf and started lending the very next day. By now, the fire had its own weather. It pulled in wind and threw flames hundreds of feet into the air. The Palace Hotel, which had ridden out the quake almost untouched, burned to a shell. The fire crossed Market Street, climbed Nob Hill, and turned the millionaires' mansions to ash. It tore through Chinatown, where the death toll would never be properly counted. When it finally died on the 4th day, beaten back by dynamite fire breaks and a little rain, it had destroyed more than 500 city blocks. 4 square miles of San Francisco were simply gone. The fire was out. Now came the problem of the living. Out of about 400,000 people, around 250,000 had no home left. They poured into Golden Gate Park and the Presidio and threw up a city of tents almost overnight. The army handed out rations. People lined up for bread and cooked their meals out in the open streets because lighting a stove indoors could start the whole nightmare again. For weeks, one of the wealthiest cities in America lived in canvas tents on the grass, waiting to find out if it had a future at all. There is an uglier part of this story. The city's leaders were terrified that the world would see San Francisco as a place that earthquakes destroy. So they did something cynical. They blamed the fire and played down the quake. Partly because insurance covered fire but not earthquakes. And they buried the real death toll. The official count was put at around 478. The deaths of Chinese residents and immigrants were barely recorded at all. Decades later, a city archivist named Gladys Hansen spent years going through the records and put the true number above 3,000. The cover-up protected real estate prices, and it delayed earthquake safety laws for a generation. But San Francisco was not the kind of city that stayed down. Most people had lost everything, even the papers that proved who they were. So Giannini lent on nothing but a face and a handshake. He famously said, "The glad hand is easy in sunshine, but it is the helping hand in a dark day that people remember to the end of time." Almost every one of those handshake loans was paid back in full. Money and lumber poured in from across the country. The rule this time was simple: build it back stronger. Within 3 years, the population was climbing again, and the ruins were vanishing under new steel and stone. Just 9 years after the fire, San Francisco threw open the gates of one of the most beautiful World's Fairs ever built. The Panama Pacific International Exposition of 1915. They called it the Jewel City. It rose on reclaimed marshland and covered more than 600 acres of palaces and courts and lagoons. At its center stood the Tower of Jewels, 43 stories tall, hung with 100,000 cut glass gems that flashed in the sun. At night, a barge offshore with 48 searchlights threw colored beams across the fog like a man-made aurora. Over 18 million people came. The message to the world was impossible to miss. San Francisco was not just back. It was dazzling. But the fault never went anywhere. The San Andreas is still down there, locked and building pressure, exactly as it was on that April morning. Geologists do not ask if another great quake will come, only when. The city that handshake banker helped save kept growing. Giannini's little Bank of Italy became Bank of America, the largest bank in the world. And every year, in the dark before dawn on April 18th, a small crowd still gathers at Lotta's Fountain downtown at 12 minutes past 5, the survivors and their descendants, to stand for a moment in the exact minute the city came apart. San Francisco today is glass and steel and light, built on the ashes of the one that burned. Next time you see this skyline, remember it died once, completely, and chose to come back brighter. Thank you for walking through it with me. If this brought the city back to life for you, hit like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments which city I should rebuild next.